We've come to know BMW today as one of the kings of the compact executive market. But BMW as we know them have only really existed since the early 1960s, when they brought us the Neue Klasse, followed on by the O2 series and New 6, forming eventually the range we know today as the 5 Series, 3 Series and 7 Series. But in the 1960s, they were still really finding their feet, figuring out what formula would entice customers to create the aura of BMW as we know them. This month at Manor Park Classics, though, we have a BMW E21, the first generation of compact saloon to be known officially as the 3 Series. And this is a 320, a late 320 at that, meaning it has a lovely 6-cylinder engine under the bonnet. And though it wasn't the first compact executive BMW, as far as I'm concerned, this is the car where they got it all right for the first time, where it is so recognisable as the BMW we know and love today. Back in the glory days, BMW didn't do flashy. They hired stylists like Wilhelm Hofmeister, Marcello Gandini and later Klaus Luther to design classy, elegant and instantly recognisable shapes that would be acceptable to everyone but always recognisable as BMWs. For the E21 they brought in Paul Bracq, the legendary Paul Bracq, to pen what is so simple. The shark nose front end, the 3-box shape, the creases, the door handles borrowed from the 5 Series, the glass house, the Hofmeister kink, everything about this car screams BMW. In fact, I think you could probably show this car, less its badges, to anyone on the planet, and they would probably be able to tell you that this was a BMW. In spite of the fact it's nearly 50 years old now, this car. It's incredible how that styling DNA was so finely formed in the 60s and 70s and then slowly feeds down through the generations. But mechanically, BMWs weren't anything massively special. Yes, we hold them up as these mechanical icons of the compact rear drive, very, very fast compact saloons, but in period, everything was still rear wheel drive. What was it about a BMW that made it special? Well, on paper, you wouldn't quite see. McPherson struts at the front were all well and good, but lots of people were using McPherson struts by the 70s. And at the back, we have semi-trailing arms. Yes, it's independent. Yes, it's infinitely better than a live axle, but it's not special. It's not like what Jaguar were doing, for example. This is very much like what Triumph were doing in the 60s and 70s. What is it about this then that really brings it out compared to its contemporaries? Well, I've already mentioned it very quickly, but a lot of it is with what rests under here. But additionally, BMWs were not always bought as sports saloons. I think we tend to view them as that today, but in period, a lot of the people who bought these did so because they were just good cars. Back in the 1970s, it wasn't uncommon for a lot of even premium car interiors to be a bit chocolate boxy. Chocolate boxy in the way that they felt quite delicate. They felt like they could snap at any point. Plastic interiors were nothing new, but they were not quality. Quality in the mass market at this point was a very, very thin strip of wood veneer. Instead, what BMW decided to do was just go for the ergonomics. Let's make the driving position as good as it can be. Let's make the instruments as clear as they can be. Let's make all the interior plastics feel like quality items. And then let's put a light and very comfortable interior in here as well. People bought BMWs not necessarily because they were fast or because they drove brilliantly, but because they were solid, because they felt so much nicer than any equivalent. Just for an indication, a top spec E21 BMW, a 323i, with no extra options ticked, was more expensive than a V8 engine Rover SD1. You had to pay 7 Series money for 3 Series size. It sounds ridiculous, but that's how far beyond BMW were in period. And I think when it comes to a compact saloon this kind of dimension, it also comes to the engine. Hidden beneath the air cleaner, behind this forward hinging bonnet, is BMW's Little Six. In a size of car that would usually have a 4-cylinder engine, here is a 2-litre straight 6, which gives you all the refinement, the smoothness, the sonority of a 6-cylinder engine, because the kind of people who would have bought this car weren't overly fussed about fuel economy. They wanted the best car possible, and this engine is what gave them that. This engine led to the famous straight sixes that BMW became known for, and is essentially the same engine as well that was found in the later and iconic E30 325i. Before this, BMW didn't produce a small car with a 6-cylinder engine. But from 1977, when they put this 6-cylinder engine in this little car, it became the standard. BMWs should only have 6-cylinder engines. And those concepts of refinement and smoothness are exactly what you get in the driving experience, because this car doesn't have power steering, and we'll come back to that in a minute, but what it means is that you've got this big steering wheel. You've got this brilliant driving position, but you've got very, very floaty suspension, and you've got that 6-cylinder engine to go with it. And what it all means is that this car naturally feels quite relaxed in its driving character. It doesn't feel immediately like a car you'd want to go out and thrash. It feels like a car you'd want to drive very smoothly, delicately, quickly, maybe, but not rudely. You want to drive it comfortably, if you get what I mean. So let's get head to head with that Little Six engine, known as the M60 in this car, later as the M20. And it's so sonorous, so sonorous. It's only a little 2-litre thing, it's over square as well, so it's not a hugely torquey engine, it's not a low down engine, it's an engine that enjoys revving. It's an engine that you want to extend. And that feels very sports car as well, but again, it adds to the refinement of it. It enjoys spinning the engine just so beautifully. So to that really soft suspension, and it sounds like a misnomer when I say soft suspension in BMW these days, but in the period, most cars had softer suspension than they do today. But remember as well that people were buying this car as a luxury saloon, something very, very premium, so they didn't want a rock hard ride. But the ride is not something that presents a trouble for this car's chassis. McPherson struts at the front, which is the standard BMW recipe. Independent rear suspension, but it is by semi-trailing arms, which is not enormously sophisticated and can lead to some tail-happy snap oversteer antics. But it also means that up to that point, it's very, very predictable. You have a little bit of understeer coming into a corner, and then it slowly steps out. It's only if you do something stupid, usually on a wet road, that it catches you out. What it actually means in practice is that this car is more comfortable than my 25-year newer E46, which is a bigger, heavier car, but this is more comfortable. And then you've got that 6-cylinder, which sounds so good. And the gear change is exceptional. Lovely throttle response, which means it's very easy to heel and toe. And BMWs aren't usually known for their change quality, but this one is just so snickety. It's so positive. Little 5-speed gearbox. No power steering means there's a lot of arm twirling. but I think it really suits the character of this car as something that has an awful lot of poise about it. It's clearly a very well engineered car, but it feels so much like it's from another era. And I mean that in the best possible way.